Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. Hello, everybody. It's Timms here, Vicky, the White Zulu, or my new name, the Great She-Elephant, not because of my size, but because I'm now the matriarch of the Loving Life Society. So that's another name I've acquired. Today, I'm going to tell you a bit more about my life as a young girl in Durban, 1969. And this is part 3. I also had the briefest of dalliances with the Hells Angels. 4 Nora House friends and I had been to a matinee at the movies one Saturday in late autumn and came out blinking in the harsh midday sunlight to find a group of 6 bikers in full black leather regalia leaning against the wall of the Playhouse in Smith Street. Like actors in a B-grade biker movie, each guy had the sole of one boot against the brickwork as they lounged, smoking nonchalantly, while they admired their glimmering, polished machines, which were parked next to the curb at the entrance to the Flick House. Shiny helmets casually dangling by chin straps from ape hangers, handlebars. Do you remember those, the ape hangers? The bikers wolf whistled at us and we turned to look at them. Should we? One of the girls asked. Angie and I shrugged and looked at them again, inspecting them more closely this time, as by now our eyes had adjusted to the bright light. Now they looked less like hardened bad boy bikers, with some of them barely out of the acne stage, and none of them could have been over the age of 20. It was only the tight black leather outfits that made them remotely attractive enough to warrant a second glance from us. That and those gleaming, magnificently macho-looking bikes. Why not? We can dump them if they're no good, she said, and we strolled over, just as nonchalantly. We're the branch of the Hells Angels, said what appeared to be the leader, and the whole bunch seemed harmless enough for us to accept a lift back to our residence. We climbed on behind the guys and hung onto their leather-clad torsos as the bikes roared into life. Most of them were Harley Davidsons, although there were a couple of Suzukis as well. Plastics, they called them, or Jap crap. They took off at breakneck speed, back wheels fishtailing up Smith Street, forcing us to grip tighter around their midriffs, and no doubt giving them as much as a thrill as we were getting from the G-force of their acceleration. When we reached our destination, their spokesman, Dave, said, "Do you want to go out for a burn up the north coast tomorrow?" "Well, that was fun," I said after we'd climbed off and reeled about on the pavement outside Nora House, breathlessly for a moment or two with our legs shaking. "Okay, let's do it again." So they picked us up the following morning and we hurtled up the north coast, reaching Mhlali, a drive that normally takes just over an hour, in 40 minutes. It was exhilarating to travel at speeds of well over 100 miles an hour. And since helmets weren't obligatory for passengers, we arrived windswept with our faces glowing. I thoroughly enjoyed the rush as well as the aspect of danger, which would have given my parents apoplexy if they'd had any idea of how I was spending my Sunday morning. Once we were stationary, however, those rebel guys, those cool Hell's Angel gang members, turned out to be rather dull. When he took his helmet off, the one I'd been riding pillion behind had a distinctly weaselly look about him. His most attractive feature had been his pert behind, nicely clad in tight black leather. Now I saw that he had no chin, mystic peach fuzz of brand new facial growth on his upper lip in an unsuccessful attempt to conceal his pimples. They had no conversation other than bikes, and we had to sit around bored and kicking our heels while they examined each machine minutely and discussed at length what modifications they would do next. "I'm bored," said Angie. "Mine's so thick that I can't understand a word he says, and he's hideously ugly without his helmet on. Look." She had a point. He looked like an adult walrus with a long drooping moustache instead of tusks. "Mine smells horrible, and he looks revolting without his skid lid," muttered Jackie. Admittedly, her escort did resemble an ill-shapen, doped bear. They were a charmless bunch. "I'm so glad they didn't take us down to the beach," I said. "I don't want to be seen in public with them. Imagine the stick we'd get from the other guys." After an interminably dull morning, we roared back to Durban, and as we raced down West Street, exhausts bellowing, several khaki-clad traffic policemen on their own powerful bikes streaked out suddenly from a side alley and gave chase. To my relief, our guys pulled over in response to the wailing sirens and sat meekly in their saddles while the police walked around each machine, inspecting it for illegal modifications. Eventually, they issued one ticket for an exhaust without a silencer and a warning to them all for speeding. And after they were dismissed, and with sufficient insolence to make a statement, the bikers took off again this time a little more sedately and no fishtailing. We went out again the following weekend, only for the sake of that thrill of tearing along the coast on their bikes. But we lost interest in them just as rapidly as they catapulted us from town to town. Don't come around anymore, Angie more or less ordered them after our second Sunday out. The lady warden won't want you guys hanging around our res. This was a blatant untruth, but we decided early on that dating them was never going to be an option. Okay, grunted Dave meekly. They accepted this brush off with surprising acquiescence for such reputed bad boys. Apparently the veneer of rebellion was very thin. Africans. I don't want to sound like a bleeding heart liberal in my following description of how all the non-whites lived, but it's factual, and none of us had any prediction, prophecy, or forewarning of what life would be like if Africans took over the country. Now that I know better, I realize that life for every single race in South Africa was of far, far better quality than after 1994, when they actually did so. I was so preoccupied with my own life that I hardly noticed how the Africans were living. There were plenty of them in Durban going about their business, but comparatively few came into the city centre. They did all their shopping in Grey Street in the Indian-owned shops, and only then as workers doing menial jobs such as messengers and cleaners. There were African cooks, waitresses, and cleaners at Nora House, but they disappeared after dark. Some years later, after I'd grown up a bit, I learned that the life of these Africans was a far cry from mine. The 1950 Group Areas Act stipulated that Africans could not live anywhere near the cities. Non-whites had to be out of the city and back in their locations and townships on the furthest edges of Durban by nightfall, unless they could show a pass stating that they had permission to stay and work at an evening job in the city, mostly as waiters, office cleaners, or washing dishes in restaurants. Indians and coloureds could live in their own government-designated townships a little closer, but still not near to where the white suburbs began. Everybody who wasn't white had to spend a large amount of their admittedly low wages just getting to and from work, traipsing out to the bus ranks to queue patiently in long lines to catch the Green Corporation buses, Green Mambas we all called them, the transport system run by the city's municipality. This was all about almost 2 decades before private transport enterprises like those cursed minibus taxis were allowed to compete with these buses. The commuters, when they eventually got a seat on a bus, and after a slow journey of anything between 1 and 3 hours, still had to get off miles away from their houses and walk the rest of the way, getting home late at night. By the same token, they'd have to get up as early as 4 in the morning to make the long commute, first on foot and then by bus back into the city to work all day. Most of them did this 6 days a week and sometimes 7 if they worked in hotels and restaurants. They were allowed one weekend off a month. The police were entitled to stop anybody of all races, that's including us, and demand to see their dompas, the identity passbook that every South African citizen, black or white, had to carry at all times. Even if they had a legitimate job in the city, an African without their passbook would be put into a yellow police van and taken away for God knows what sort of questioning, and if they were lucky, just a stiff fine. The dompas contained our driver's license, and for whites only, permits that entitled us to carry up to 5 firearms. The ID passbook system served many purposes for the government because the all-white and mostly Afrikaner South African police could then enforce the whites-only rules everywhere, even going so far as to restrict who sat on park benches. If an African was sitting on a bench marked for whites or Europeans, which meant the same thing, but sounded a little less racist, he would then be hauled off to the nearest police station for processing. Most importantly to the police at that time was that the last 3 digits of our ID numbers showed what race we belonged to. The upside of all this was that there was no menace at night, nor were there beggars or bag snatchers in the streets. When Africans did walk around in the city centre, they kept out of our way and we were never pushed or jostled. At the time, I wasn't aware of any of this. None of us gave a thought as to why Africans seemed to evaporate into thin air at night. This was why apartheid was so successful for 46 years. Because we whites weren't affected and the work appeared to be done by magic, our lives went smoothly on. We'd all become inured to the supposed poverty, the desperation and defeat of those other allegedly lesser races. We were immune by now to horrors of reported violence and mass killings in the townships, described by the government-owned press as unrest. The majority of whites had to put aside their guilt and try and look ahead of them rather than around them. It was too big a challenge and too dangerous to become involved against apartheid. When I think about it now, I can see how hard it was, especially for the women. I can't even begin to imagine how they managed to get up so early, walk so far, do a full day's work washing, ironing, cleaning, child minding, cooking, and many other various jobs for people like us in our comparatively luxurious homes, before wearily trudging home, already exhausted, to have to do the same things for their families, but under far more demanding circumstances. Even though they had government-supplied electricity and running water, their lavatories were pit latrines outside, which had to be redug frequently. A lot of people who were classified black, mostly Zulus, and to a lesser extent Xhosas, with a few Shangaan and Basotho families here and there, built themselves shacks from whatever material was available. Sheets of corrugated iron were nailed or tied together with wire and insulated inside with cardboard. Hardboard, purloined from billboards and road signs, became walls and roofs, and it was quite common to see the curly white writing of Coca-Cola on a red shack. Every shanty housed a couple of adults, several children, and possibly a grandparent or two. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.